Watching News at Prime, let's get into a different discussion now. Tripartite alliance partner, the South African Communist Party, reiterating its disapproval of the ANC's decision to form a government of national unity with certain parties. That point being made this weekend. It believes the ANC should have approached those with similar principles as the party's recent dismal election result is discussed by the National Executive Committee of the ANC. Let's understand more of what came out of this meeting, which, by the way, is still ongoing. It's now the Lekgotla of the ANC. We're joined by Mdumiseni Ntuli. He is the chief whip of the ANC in Parliament, but in this instance, he will be talking to us in his capacity as head of elections. Mr. Ntuli, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Well, good evening, Koli, and good evening to the viewers at home, and thank you very much for inviting us.
Let's start with the SACP. They are unrelenting on this decision of the ANC to go with what they say are forces to the right. And they are clear that these are not the type of people that the ANC would ordinarily have gone to bed with. It would be better if the ANC were irritated by the EFF in cabinet, and I suppose by extension, the MK party. What does the ANC say in that regard?
You see, the key word, Claudia, the key word is that ordinarily. That word underlies the fact that the conditions we find ourselves in today were not of our own making. So we're out of our own making. We had a very protracted engagement with various political parties, including the EFF and the MK. There were certain areas where we could not agree with them. As an example, the EFF and MK said, we want to work with you and you alone. Disregard everybody else, enter into a grand coalition with us and we form government together. But the MK part on the other side was advancing that perspective, equally saying, we would not want you to come with President Ramaphosa as a presidential candidate for this kind of a grand coalition. So we said to them, then if you approach the discussion in that way, you are setting conditions for us, and we're not demonstrating any commitment to reach certain compromises. It will be difficult to work together under those conditions. The EFF, in a very same way as the DA, told us in no uncertain terms that you are a dying part. We have an obligation, naturally, to inherit the future of this country on the edges of the African National Congress. Because when we said to them, I mean, you have worked with the DA in many municipalities to undermine the African National Congress. You were never worried about this ideological disposition. Why now? And why can't we work together in the coalition, in the government of national union? Their argument was that, no, the reason we worked with the DA was because we have an obligation to ensure that we become the leading party in this country. And the only way we're going to succeed in doing that is a decimation of the ANC. And you have no capacity to stand and remain a leader of this country when you are uprooted from governance. So we work with the DA to remove you from the levers of power so that you can weaken you on the side and take over from you.
Yeah.
So basically, Claudia, just in less than a second, what it meant is that here are two forces, one on the far left of the ANC, the other one on the far right, both committed to the destruction of the ANC, but each one of them wanting to work with us alone and not with others. And we said, no, let's work together. The ANC will defend itself against the far left opponents, equally against the far right opponents, in this case represented by the DA, and on the extreme left, represented by the EFF.
I'm not going to waste time, because time is of the essence, discussing whether this is a coalition or a government of national unity. Helen Zille seemingly wanting to resuscitate that discussion. But I will ask you this. This is the first time that the ANC has the opportunity to reflect on its performance in the elections. How does the party rise from the ashes?
Well, I think, Claudia, there are three fundamental issues that we've been grappling with in the first 3 days of the National Executive Committee and even today in the Lekgotla. The first one is that there is something radically wrong with the state of the ANC, both in terms of the quality of membership and the quality of leadership. And I will explain that at some point later. The second issue is the failure of the economy. And of course, that failure of the economy can equally be appropriated to a lack of leadership that is supposed to provide the strategic leadership at the local, provincial, and the national level for the economy to serve the majority of our people. But the failure of the economy to absorb as many South Africans as possible, particularly the youth, had an impact on the performance of the ANC. The third one is the state of governance, more especially at a local government level. If you look at these elections slowly, the contestation in these elections, unlike in the past, were more about the basic services, which are essentially the primary responsibility of the local government sphere of our country, as opposed to provincial and national. But what was also very worrying, which happened for the first time, in terms of what the research was indicating, our own research and external research, was a very disturbing pattern where the levels of confidence of the population towards the ANC-led national and provincial government was almost converging with the same level of confidence that the population has on local government. That was happening for the first time. We've never had to deal with that situation. What has made it possible historically for the ANC to use its influence and leadership role of the national and provincial government, even in local government elections, and succeed, was because the perception and the view of the population about the spheres above local government was much more rated higher, much more positive, much more confident. And we did not enjoy that in these elections where we come from.
A number of things there that you are putting up on the board as flashpoints for why the ANC performed in this way. If I focus the attention on the quality of membership, but I want to raise a controversial matter which your chairperson, the ANC chairperson, Gwede Mantashe, on the back of these elections, pointed out and has never actually retracted that statement, is the question of tribalism within the ANC. Are there still tribalist or tribalistic tendencies within the ANC? Is there ethnic chauvinism? And I'm talking about it on the back of Mr. Mantashe saying that the MK party vote was an ethnic vote centered in KZN.
You see, Xoli, fortunately, we've had an opportunity in the NEC in detail to reflect on these challenges. What is an emerging consensus in the leadership of the ANC is that the country is regressing in many spheres. Racially, there's more disintegration between racial groups in the country.
So in other words, social cohesion, there's
a major challenge, which is why the movement has called, in support of the call made by President Mbeki, President Ramaphosa said, yes, indeed, we need a national dialogue because we've got to respond to many, many challenges that if we don't respond to them as South Africans, the country is going to even degenerate to the worst position. The other issue is what we have defined and characterized as ethno-nationalism, which is ethnic nationalism. It's not necessarily an ANC problem. You know, the ANC draws its own membership from the population of this country. So basically, what will happen in the ANC will to a larger extent be a reflection of what is happening in the country. Look at the PA led by Gayton McKenzie. On what basis were they managing to coordinate and win a big support within the colored community? It was purely on the basis that they are coloreds. And they feel that the current dispensation has not effectively addressed their own fundamental concerns as the colored population, who have identical culture, language, to a certain extent, who are found in common geographical areas in different parts of the country. The grievance that emerged within that community was that the South Africa that is progressing is leaving us behind. Now, what the national chairperson of the ANC was explaining was that if you look at the pattern of what happened in KZN, is that you have a dominance of the support that has departed from the ANC to the MK party, coming from the same geographical area, which is KwaZulu-Natal. And of course, supporting a leader who is also coming from the very same province who was in the leadership of the ANC. But our own analysis is that it's not purely an ethnic kind of mobilization. It's a much more larger problem of a disintegration in the country, which is emerging, and people deciding that we would rather side with those that are closer to us geographically, cultural, or whatever other connection that makes people to feel that they're together. Now, that is a challenge against the National Democratic Revolution, whose strategic objective is the creation of a united, non-racial, non-sexist, and a democratic South Africa. It's a major setback. Yeah. And as we are discussing in the Lehut and including in the NEC, we are contending with a fundamental question. What is it that we have to do differently to defend the National Democratic Revolution, which is in the best interest of our country, but also to defend the leader of that project, which is the African National Congress? So this disintegration is a major challenge. I mean, so many people have not gone out to vote on the election day. 12 million were registered, 10 million were unregistered. Why? It means the democratic project in this country is not adequately inspiring confidence and making people to feel I'm part of this journey and I have a responsibility to support the success of our democratic project. It's a fundamental question. It's not a simple question with one or simple answer. It requires a leadership that has a capacity to think strategically to respond to this question.
Let me finish the conversation on the question of leadership. There are so many own goals by the ANC on the question of leadership, because once you get the leadership right, you're able then to almost have all the other areas fall into place if you have the right leadership. Now, how are South Africans supposed to be inspired that the ANC truly has seen its faults if it still goes and accepts people like Zizigwodwa in Parliament as members of Parliament whilst he is going through a criminal case? But I also want to finish off with the question around VBS, because it's almost the same thread running through that. You have a call now by the ANC that says, at least in Limpopo, revive VBS, but no one is saying this is how we're going to prevent the corrupt within us from getting their grubby hands into the coffers of poor people who are merely saving for themselves, either to get buried in dignity or saving for the future of their children. Where is leadership going in the ANC?
Well, let me start with the latter issue. You know, I think this VBS question, both the ANC and the population of that community, the vendor community, have learned something out of what has happened. And many of us are very happy that the law enforcement agencies in this country, slow as it may appear, are acting on that matter to ensure that those who are implicated and who have done something wrong within that bank are taken to task and account for their sins. The reason why we believe the position of the ANC in Limpopo, which was advanced including in the NEC by their provincial leadership, that bring back the bank. Because beside the corrupt elements and the corruption that took place in that bank, that institution has been very important for the poor and the marginalized of that community. The fact that certain people took advantage of that and abused the institution, it does not justify a total elimination of that possibility for that community to generate their own local income, to have capital that they need to invest in their local economy, but equally as they play their own stock fell, to have an institution nearby through which they can invest and generate revenue for the money that they receive at the end of the year. So our view is that we must separate the corruption that has taken place from the purpose through which the bank in the first place was conceptualized and designed for. And that is why we say it would be in the best interest of that community, listening to what the leadership of Limpopo has argued, for the bank to be reinstated. But the fundamental question is, what lessons will we be taking on board if government decide to reinstate the license of the bank and all that comes with it, to ensure that this level of impunity and corruption does not again revisit that bank. The issue about the leadership issue and the credibility of the movement, you pose a question about what happened with Comrade Zizi. You know, I'm glad that ultimately a decision was made by Comrade Zizi that he must resign from Parliament. And I would imagine that decision he made was equally inspired by what would have been a discussion, a quiet discussion, I would imagine, with the leadership of the ANC, because as he was being sworn in and becoming a member of Parliament, we all could hear the noise outside of people who are saying, but this is not consistent with the position the movement has adopted. And many of us went publicly to explain what has happened and what has not happened. And ultimately, Comrade Zizi did that which was right, which was to get out of Parliament. So the message that we need to convey to the population of this country is that, yes, of course, it may very well be that he is sworn into Parliament, generated a serious negativity on the basis that we're seen not to be acting consistent with our own guidelines. But the matter has been corrected.
All right. Now that we have the opportunity, perhaps, we've dropped sport, which is a major crime on my part. Yeah. We get to finish off this conversation properly. So, finally, therefore, has the ANC taken a position on VBS that it must be reinstated? If so, what will the approach to government be?
Well, look, the leadership of the province has made a public statement and equally presented their proposal to the National Executive Committee. Obviously, the immediate response of the NEC in the discussion was that this matter is a matter that cannot merely be directed by the ANC. It's a governance matter. There are processes in government that will have to unfold in order for the determination to be made whether the bank is reinstated or not. I believe that by the time the NEC concludes its lekgotla tomorrow, it would have clarified its mind and its own positions about what is right and wrong and what belongs to the leadership of the ANC and what should be left to the hands of government. So I came to this interview, of course, leaving behind just at the end of the commissions that we're discussing today. And tomorrow, there will be a plenary discussion where we will concretize the positions that are as a result of recommendations emerging from different commissions. That matter will be part of the issues that I think the national leadership, when it concludes its business tomorrow, will be able to give a guidance to the leadership of Limpopo and the country in general about what is the next course of action, what's an appropriate way to deal with this question.
The leaders of the ANC in Limpopo are the only ones who are going through court cases right now around VBS. Does the party feel the need to say, apologize for what has happened, apologize to the people of Limpopo for this bank going under?
Well, a matter like that hasn't arisen. There's not arisen in the meeting of the ANC. Like I'm saying, this matter is still under a very protected discussion, including in the National Executive Committee that is concluding tomorrow. It would be premature for me to express a personal view about whether or not an apology is warranted in this case until the leadership, which is, as I'm saying, is applying its collective mind on this question, properly synthesize the circumstances under which this corruption took place, the impact it has had, and therefore the public position that the movement must take in the light of the fact that this matter has been brought back to our agenda on the basis of the position of the PEC in Limpopo province.
Mdumiseni Ntuli, the head of elections of the ANC, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Doubling up as the chief whip of the ANC in Parliament. More news after the break.